Hello everybody, welcome to our conversation on the county seat today. We are spending time with Representative Phil Lyman. Now, in full disclosure, I have to tell you that I've known Phil Lyman a long time. In fact, shortly after he was first elected to the county commission in San Juan County, and I knew he was a quality guy from the very first day I met him, and a real patriot. And thank you for taking a half hour to talk with us today.
Thank you, Chad, and thanks for what you're doing. County seat's been a really important program for counties, and as a county commissioner, I can attest to the impact and effect that you've had. So we need that voice.
Well, you've come a long way since county commission. Now, there's some people who go, well, county commissioner is a better job than being a state legislator.
100% better. There is no better job than county commissioner. Those guys, they are dealing with things that affect their neighbors. I love the county commissioners, and you know that. My whole Yellow Cake Caucus is designed for county commissioners and to engage them. I really think that's where the power should be, and hopefully we can push it to the counties.
So new caucuses don't come up that often at the legislature, and particularly rural ones. I mean, the rural caucus is a well-established thing. And a caucus, by the way, for those of you who may not attend the legislature, it is a group that identifies around a purpose and is a mixture of legislators and people who come to inform them. And you started Yellow Cake. Now, Yellow Cake, Yellow Cake is not like lemon cake with frosting.
It could be. Or it could be uranium refined.
Yes, yeah. It could be. What was the whole idea behind the Yellow Cake Caucus?
So for me, when I came up, I representing at that time a little bit of 6 counties and part of another one, so 7 counties, and I wanted to connect with the commissioners. And so my caucus was a little bit different. It wasn't a group of legislators caucusing, it was a group of county commissioners coming up to help me do my job. And what I identified in the legislature, as a rural legislator, I am way, way outnumbered by the people on the Wasatch Front. But when I leverage the commissioners to come up and inform them and help them, they have a bigger voice in UAC because theirs is not population based. They've got the 3 commissioners for the most part per county. And so it was really to bring them on board and enlist their help and see what I could do for them. And it's they've done more for me in the legislature probably than I've done for them. But together we've been able to get some really important things done.
How important is it for people? I mean, I'll be honest with you. My next door neighbor doesn't care a thing about rural Utah. And I say they need this bill. When we get talking about things, and they'll say, screw it. It doesn't affect me.
Right.
Rural Utah does affect the Wasatch Front.
It's kind of where our food comes from, and our minerals, and and really good people. In fact, most people, that's where their heritage is. You get talking to somebody, it's like, oh yeah, my grandpa, came from Loa, or
right.
My uncle's got a farm down in Beaver. Things like that. That people, when we start connecting, people want to be connected to that heritage because it's honest, it's real, and it's kind of like who we are in Utah, hopefully.
Are you worried about that culture disappearing? I mean, Moab has taken many, I was going to say many right turns, but I think there are many left turns over the past 25, 30 years. It just doesn't resemble itself. And when you have county council members chiding somebody for suggesting that the children do the Pledge of Allegiance in school, on the record in a board meeting, that it is not the Grand County of 30 years ago.
Well, this has been a real issue for me that Utah has kind of backed out of the outdoor recreation space, almost like giving up that territory to environmentalists. The environmentalists are trying to send the narrative that, if you like to recreate, then you must want to contribute to Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and put a Wild Utah sign in your yard. But the truth is, tourism and outdoor recreation is part of who we are. It's part of why we live in this rural area. And Moab is really symbolic because they've got 140, they're headquarters for 140 nonprofits, most of them some flavor of environmentalism. So you get a good, conservative business person in Moab, and they've got a target on their back, not just from some of the liberals that live there, but from outside the community and outside the state and outside the country even.
But you know, there's this thing going on where you'll take a little rural town like Farron, and they'll go, the locals will start to complain. Well, we don't want to promote tourism here anymore because we don't want to become Moab.
Right.
Something happened to the culture. It happened in Moab. It's kind of happening it is happening in Kanab. Kanab is changing. That's your district too.
Is,
so,
yeah.
and Escalante is challenged with it a little bit. How do we go about preserving our best quality, which is this stoic, rural ethic of, rural guys are just, they'll do business on a handshake and they'll deliver. And it's changing from that.
So Utah is still a conservative state, by and large. And you get up to the legislature and you find out Utah is still pretty conservative. So my solution is to give some support to people that want to just live their lives and be free and enjoy the outdoors and outdoor recreation. And it's interesting because we've seen, the Patagonias and the REIs of the world are not dominating as much as they did 10 years ago. It's the small boutiques, and also I think the big Wilderness Society and Audubon Society I think have less sway on some of those. So to me, the door is open. If Utah wants to step back in and say, you know what, this is our outdoor recreation. These are our public lands, and we're going to actively promote this and own it as a county. And again, if we can do it in Grand County, maybe people will stop saying, we don't want to become another Moab, because Moab's a pretty special place.
No, it is.
And if you could overcome the politics in that area and kind of empower some of those, honest brokers that are just trying to enjoy the outdoors, and they care more about the environment. You know better than anybody. Environmentalism is not about environment; it's about control, and it's political, and that's where the legislature, we owe it to those communities to step in and say, this isn't going to continue on. We're not going to keep playing these games that are destructive.
So in light of that, you got a reprieve with the Trump administration, and we rolled the clock back on a lot of energy issues and land issues. Not enough. And then we turn around and we flip. We're in the Biden administration now, and it seems like they're moving back to where we were in 2013 with a vengeance.
Right. Anytime you're dealing with energy, you're talking about long-term projects.
Right.
Developing projects that may be 30, 40, 50, 100 years. And so when you have a president that comes out and says, don't worry, we'll keep using fossil fuels for another 10 years. If that was true, no one's going to make another dime of investment into fossil fuels, because 10 years is not long enough to recoup the billions of dollars that they're going to put into that infrastructure.
Do you think they do it because they're dumb, or they want to change our ability to be self-sustaining? Seriously, that's a question that I ask fairly regularly. Is this on purpose, or is this just because they're nincompoops?
You would hope that it's because they're dumb. I'm afraid the real answer is because they are sinister and they are trying to kill that industry. And not because America needs that, but because some special interest in China or Russia or somewhere is funneling money into projects that are, we're the threat. The United States is the threat to those things. So, no, I think it's nefarious.
Yeah, I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but really, if you think about it, it's not just energy. It's military preparedness. We've done a lot of changing in 2 years on how our military trains. We've taken half of the strategic petroleum reserve and put it on the open market. And I've heard, I don't know this for a fact, but I've heard we sold some of it to China.
Right.
And so our fuel reserves are down. We've got an army that's more concerned about what you call a soldier than what a soldier does. And we've got this really precarious place. Our institutions are falling apart, and we have toxic chemical spills. We destroy food supplies, and we try and lock people down. I can't think of a worse set of scenarios to really damage this country.
I don't know if you were in the Yellow Cake Caucus when we had Lawrence Beatty come down from the Idaho National Labs. and he's not political. He's
Right.
he's saying nuclear energy is pretty important. If we really want energy in this country, it's pretty important. And then he put up a map of where the resources are located, and I said, that seems pretty centered around Bears Ears. And he said, that sounds like a local political question. I'm not going to go there. But that's so you get in and you say, why is Bears Ears so important to these people? And when you look at the energy resources that are there, the uranium that's there, the potential that's there, and you see how adamant they are to lock it up at any cost, then you start saying, this is not a benign effort. This is not innocent.
Isn't the coal, the Andalex coal, the reason that Grand Staircase came about?
If anyone's willing to, do a little bit of deductive reasoning, you'd say that is the reason for the Grand Staircase, to lock up that coal.
Yeah.
And then you've got down in the Bears Ears, there's a piece of that that wasn't put in the monument. That from the beginning I would say, why is this not in the monument? I mean, I'm glad it's not, but why is it not? And then one of my prospector friends was in my office and he looked at my map and he said, oh, that's the Uranium One claims. And Uranium One was the company that Hillary Clinton brokered the deal to sell to Russia. And you can say, oh, this conspiracy theory and put on your tinfoil hat, or you can look at, when you're living there and you're watching it, that's why I say when you're in a shootout, you can see who's firing at you. And in this situation, it's not Russia. It's our own administration.
I'm slack-jawed, but I had not heard that before.
Yeah. So you've got a bunch of Uranium One claims sitting right out there on the edge of Bears Ears and of the National Monument, and there's a lot of uranium asset there, and it's going to be very important.
I want to follow up on that. Right now we're going to take a break. We'll be back with our conversation in just a minute. Welcome back to our conversation with Representative Phil Lyman, who represents the bottom half of the state, roughly. We were just talking a minute ago about energy and the energy policy, and you were mentioning a bill that Ken Ivory, Representative Ivory, has put in. This leads me to a very interesting question. What does self-sufficiency for Utah look like if we're not going to go the way of everybody else?
The president issues an executive order, and what's supposed to happen now is that comes to the Constitutional Defense Council, and we look at that and say, hey, we don't think this is constitutional. We don't think the president has the authority to shut down our energy sector or to change our public education or our health care or whatever it might be. And we send that to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General will issue, hopefully would issue a lawsuit, or at least would issue a statement. I had a bill a couple of years ago, HB 415, that said if that process happens and the Attorney General agrees that it's not constitutional, then it's unlawful to implement that in any of the state agencies. So if the administration, the executive, President Biden, if he issues an executive order that says we're going to be carbon free in Uinta County by 2030, we come and say, yeah, no, we're not. That's a pipe dream. You don't have authority to say it. You have no jurisdiction in that. And Utah, not only are we not going to do it, we're forbidden from even pursuing that in any of our agencies.
But how do you do that when the BLM is going to go ahead and withdraw all the leases because they're going to make it? Do you force leases or what?
Well, I think that's where the battle lines start to foment, and people say this is not the way a state was ever supposed to be run. And then we file some lawsuits and get some Supreme Court judgments saying, you know, maybe Bears Ears was an abuse of the Antiquities Act. Maybe it wasn't intended for that purpose that it's being used, or the Grand Staircase. Maybe the federal government doesn't have a right to retain 67% ownership of the land in Utah. These are big questions that should have been answered years and years ago, that the legislature, if they've got the political will to do it, will force that issue.
Do we have political will in the Utah State Legislature?
We have funded it. The legislature has funded it. We're up to about $20 million for 3 lawsuits: the Antiquities Act, the Retention, and FLIPMA, the Constitutionality of the Federal Lands Policy Management Act from 1976. All of those, I think, are really valid questions.
They're huge in the western states,
Yeah.
because they have such impact out here.
Right, right. And I'm probably oversimplifying some of the nuances legally of those things that others could really get into.
So what happens, Phil, if you have if you have an attorney general that gets elected that was George Soros funded?
That's the political will. That really tests, will the legislature actually put their clout to work to, cut the budget of that attorney general? Now, I will say, our attorney general just filed a big lawsuit last week.
No, the one we've got's rock solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't worry about that.
So, there's things that I'm like, do this, and I could be mistaken. And every once in a while, they do something that is so monumentally correct and right. Same with the governor's office. Every once in a while, there's something that comes out that is so on target that you say, okay, maybe we are moving in the right direction. Was Hamilton said, state legislatures must be not only vigilant but jealous and suspicious guardians of the rights of the people against federal encroachment. That really is the state legislature's job. So that's where I come to the legislature, to the majority caucus, and try to remind them, we can't shrug our shoulders when these things happen. We can't say, gosh, too bad SUA got the BLM to designate a monument, and so now we got to trade out all our sitless sections. That's like the opposite of what a legislature does. We should stand up and say, nice try.
Well, I mean, we've had, since you've been in office, we've made a pretty good track record of some things. We've required the counties to come up with their resource management plans so that the state can make a record of them, and the state's got that leverage. And so I see us doing stuff. It just doesn't feel like it's changing anything.
And things do move slow. The resource management plans, Reg Johnson was very involved in that before he became the executive director for PLIPCO, the Public Lands Policy Management Coordinating Office. Son of Matt Johnson, it's in his blood. He's a sagebrush rebel by birth, so he hopefully that shows through, and it does.
Yeah.
But it does take a long time, and I think people get frustrated watching the slow interplay of things, and the legislature could move faster.
It's got to be painfully slow in Blanding. It's slow enough for me in Holiday.
Generational. We see things that start happening in the 1970s, and raids and things that come, and it's like, will we ever change this? And then every once in a while, you see some indication that, I was telling Ken Ivory and Representative Stratton the other day, I said, it's kind of like chopping down a tree, and you chop and chop and chop and chop, and then eventually it does tip, and I think we're going to see it.
That's a good analogy. I hope so.
With a really dull, tiny little hatchet on a giant tree.
The one you keep on your keychain.
Yeah,
right?
Feels that way sometimes.
So how do we mitigate some of this federal stuff? What kind of bills can we do, and how much can the state really accomplish? Because I know people at home are going, it's all well and good to challenge the constitutionality of stuff and require the Attorney General to file a suit, but that's a 10-year process just to get it to the Supreme Court.
So the biggest challenge we have, again, is right here at home. So the urban-rural divide, there's 60-plus urban legislators in the House out of the 75. And some of them are saying, you bring up the public lands issue, and they'll say, well, I like public lands. I like to hike. Kind of like, end of discussion. It's like, well, that's not really what we're talking about. So there's a lot of education. You have Carl Albrecht, some really good representatives that are really good at articulating what it is that we're talking about, what's at stake, and why it's important to Utah. Governor Cox his roots are rural, and again, sometimes he doesn't do exactly what I would like him to do, but occasionally he's right there helping some of these issues forward, and that's huge. To have someone that can actually speak in those terms of energy, agriculture,
Well, I think
production.
That brings you up a good point, Phil. Is that some of the best advocates for rural Utah are actually urban.
Very
Kevin
much.
Stratton is
Yep.
is not a representative from rural Utah, nor is Ken Ivory, and yet they're some of the stalwarts of protecting those rural rights.
Yeah, it's honest. It's saying, yeah, we do need energy. Our electricity doesn't come from an outlet. It comes from somewhere else that feeds that outlet, and people that are willing to sit down and take a hard look at it will recognize that these things out in rural Utah are vital.
All right, we got to take another quick break. We'll be back here
Okay.
for our conversation, and we'll kind of look to the future and what your goals are.
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back to our discussion today with Representative Phil Lyman, who hails from Blanding. He's one of the original pioneer names. There are a lot of Lymans down in southern Utah. So let me ask you a question, Phil. Where do we go going forward? What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And I do want to say you have this new entourage of newly elected guys that have kind of hitched their wagon around you. Is that an encouraging sign?
Really encouraging. I wouldn't say that they are attached to me because they're really, really brilliant, young, conservative
Right.
legislators that I'm looking to for some guidance as well. But where do we go? I think what we have to do is recognize where the country is going and ask, is that where we want to go? Do we want to go down that same path of all the nonsense policies and undermining our military, undermining our energy sector, undermining our education system, and if Utah doesn't want to go there, we don't have to. That's it's still America. We can still say we're just not doing it, and it comes at a cost. Sometimes you stand up and say we're not doing it, and you find yourself
Without federal funding.
yeah, without federal funding, or in sitting.
Oh
in,
yeah, well you
potentially.
you would have a little story to
So
tell
yeah,
about
so
that.
but that's and there's a cost to saying
This is not right.
this is not right. We're not going to do it. And if everybody in Utah could, I shouldn't say everybody, but if enough people in Utah could say, that's not the direction we want to go, then we could change it. The frustrating thing to me is when there are good reasons for people not to trust the state. That they say, well, we've seen what the state does with their public lands or DNR, and we don't want that. We'd almost trust the federal government more, or we'd rather deal with the IRS than the Utah State Tax Commission. That those betrayals of that public service mentality at the state level, to me, it undermines the whole argument that we have, which is that we can do this better. And so I'm really sensitive to.
How do you fix that?
You identify it, and in the state legislature, you run a bill, you talk to a lot of people, you persuade, and that's been the most amazing thing about the legislature to me, is to see that you can actually affect things. And Utah's got good people. By and large, people are they're concerned about their kids. They're concerned about their community and their neighbors, and they're just good people. So if you can put it in the right context, if you can actually communicate that and overcome the noise of the other side that's trying to, just totally mess up that dialogue, it's a challenge. I mean, that's what made Abraham Lincoln such a great president. He could actually articulate really complex things to where people
Could understand
it.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have too many of those in the legislature. I'm not one of those. I'm trying hard to communicate, but there are some really articulate legislators, and some of these young ones that you mentioned are in that category. I think they're honest.
So how do we become this state that could secede from the Union if we needed to? I mean, it's the topic of the week. National divorce has been the topic du jour on talk radio the last week.
I'm not here just to pump up Ken Ivory, but he wrote the little pamphlet. Where's the line? And that's what we're going to say is like, we'll put up with things to this point, but you cross that line, and we're just not going to do that. And that's what people have got to be able to say. And the legislature recognize that that's a line we're not going to cross. We're not going to take it. And I'm always sensitive about. When I go back and watch these things, it's like, oh, I'm sounding really hubris, and I'm not. I want desperately just to work with people and to get agreement and consensus on things. I don't want to fight. I want people to recognize what it is that they're dealing with, what's at stake.
So if you take the issues that we need to be self-sustaining, that they would be basically water, energy, food.
Yep.
There's a big federal fingerprint on all three of those. How do we wrangle that back out? I mean, we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm just saying, looking forward, what do we need to do? What do people watching the show need to do to find a way for us to become self-sustaining? And we've got to change the way we do agriculture. We have to change the way we look at water and its relationship to it, because right now they're talking about the Great Salt Lake. And there are a lot of people that are saying, yeah, we got to cut off we got to quit growing alfalfa. And I'm going, well, the alfalfa isn't even in the watershed.
Right.
So what's the big deal?
Discernment. I think people need to be more discerning about what they hear. Like this, we say, well, agriculture is using 70% of the water, 80% of the water, 85% of the water. That's the diverted water. They're not using 85% of the 61.3 million acre feet of water that fall on the state. And that's what waters the alfalfa fields and the grazing fields. I mean, there's plenty of irrigation there too, but we're talking about the wrong thing. We're talking about this little piece of diverted water when we should be talking about the massive amount of precipitation that falls on the state. How do we manage our forests? As Randy Julander says, how do we manage our forests for water production, and how do we do those things that are actually working instead of talking about all these other decoys that don't work?
I'd love to have you come back again and talk some more.
Oh,
It's been
too.
great. Thank you for joining
Thanks,
us.
Chad.
Thank you for tuning in. Because we've been on hiatus for a while, this conversation needs to get shared. So your homework assignment is to actually get other people out and involved. Tell people that we are back and that we've got conversations and a lot of ground to cover. So we'll look for you next week. Thanks.